The headlines tell one story, but the real estate market is more than just big news. We're in it every day, working with buyers and sellers and data that shows what's really happening. No politics, no hype, just facts. Based on the numbers, here's what you need to know about the market and where we're headed.
All right, let's get started, my friends.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to talk about two sets of numbers. So the first one is going to be the numbers that drive the U.S. real estate market. And then the second one is we are going to take a deep dive in looking into the U.S. economy and how all of those relate together to the local market of real estate which we serve, which is the Arizona market. Okay. So we're going to start off with home sales. So annually right now, we are selling in 2024, we've closed with about 4.1 million home sales. Okay. And so if we were to compare that to 2008, it's actually 4.1 million. So we are the same number of home sales that we were in the Great Recession.
Sure.
What are your thoughts about that?
Like my take on that, I'm going to cut Dana off. I know she's excited to talk.
Oh, it's
We're going to listen to Pro first. So like my take, I get a lot of clients that are like, hey man, I'm going to wait for the crash to happen. If you look at, like you said, home sales going across the board, track back to 2007, 2008, we're at 4.1. So we're essentially in just the lowest market that we were back then that we are today. So if you're waiting for the crash, I think that's right now, or you may have missed it.
That it's actually the lowest, the 4.1 million is the lowest amount of sales in the past 29 years on record.
Right.
yeah. So that their area of opportunity may have already passed if people were holding off for the crash, like you're saying. I'm curious, do you think that lends itself to what we are experiencing for the first time in 40 years here in the Arizona market, it being a buyer's market? Or not the first time, sorry, but the second time?
Mhm.
I think that decline, right?
Mm-hmm.
Leads
Well, I
to
think that was the mortgage industry, obviously loaning to people that couldn't fulfill those loans or whatever. Now it's the interest rate and affordability is so tough.
Mhm.
Why the sales are super low, but they are predicting next year to go to 4.2. So just a small increase, right? So if you're kind of waiting at the crash, I think we're, super low. We're at I would think this would almost be the floor of sales for the next, I don't know if I had to guess 10 years or so, right?
Yeah. So we're coming back on the upside again.
Mm-hmm.
I think so, that we're kind of a slow but steady climb out of this.
Well, so an opportunity for buyers right now to come into the market before there's more competition again, and it lends itself back into a seller's market.
100%.
Yeah.
Like if we go like low interest rate raises prices,
I think it
raises competition. Right?
Yeah.
If we go back to the extreme during like the COVID period, that's what it was. It was super, super low interest rates, crazy competition out there. Not to say it's going to go that way, but you get the trend.
So that leads to home prices. So as you can see on the graph, we're looking at a trend. The long-term trend is a 4% appreciation year over year. So if you look at that line, that green line, it's the 4% line. What's creating the 4% is every year, we all know supplies go up, our clothing goes up, our food goes up, everything, right? So everything is going up. And so we know traditionally it's 4%. Back in 2006, at the height of the market, we're actually 21% above the trend. And this year, we're 9.9% above the trend for 2024, leading into 2025. So when I look at that number, really, if we had zero appreciation over the next 2.5 years, we would be 100% right on that trend.
On trend. And the only reason, because we've looked at this for the past 7 years, as we've gone and looked at these numbers, if we had never gone through the Great Recession, we still would have seen that we were on that trend line. So again, we go back to when people think that the market's going to crash, I don't know if they'll ever have that same opportunity because we changed lending practices. And it was almost like an anomaly that we went through that because of what was going on with, the interest-only loans and everything that we were seeing with the loan practices. So this is interesting.
What I saw from this is like the people that bought in like 07, 08, kind of like height of the market. If you track back in 7 years. So you went through the Great Recession. In 7 years, your home was worth what it was 7
Mhm.
years ago. So like if you bought it, you can ride that out for like 7 years and you're gonna get
Mhm.
right back. And if you held on to it, like so you broke even, say, let's call it 2014, now 10 years later, you probably have 30% or so appreciation on that same house that was underwater 40%.
Mhm.
Now you're back to 30%
Mhm.
positive. So I think like Gary Keller talks about, you don't try to time the market to buy or something. You buy and give the market time.
Yep.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And then the last thing I want to point out on here before we move to the next slide is you've noticed no matter how far it went down, it never went to zero
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
and it's always gone up.
Yeah.
it's always
Such a good point. And sorry, I know you're
Go
going to the next one, but then when we go back to the last one, the previous slide, despite the home sales being down slightly, we've still continued to appreciate.
for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're 9.9% above the trend line.
I know.
even in a terrible market.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's crazy.
Yeah.
People
Awesome.
still need real estate.
Yep. So the next thing we're going to look at is home prices again, but actually appreciation at a historical level. And I think we'll just slide through this one real quick. But what I hope that my takeaway is from you guys reading this slide is that what causes a price to change or go down is usually some economical or world event or, to our country. So for example, whenever we have the Great Recession, it went down. So it's always a big economic event. And why that's interesting is because we're in a really interesting time in the United States right now. And I think people can feel some weariness around it. And, is this going to be one of those big economic times? We'll have to stay tuned and find out.
Yeah, we're just in the beginning of 2025. But what's interesting is if you look back at COVID, which is one of the craziest times in our history, right?
Yeah.
Look at still, that appreciation was crazy in that time.
Well, I think like to your point, and to add on, sorry, like 21% appreciation during like the pandemic time, that is like that's so unhealthy. We can't sustain that type of appreciation. Like, yeah, if you were the ones that like capitalized on that, good for you, right? But we cannot have the world trend that way. We would be paying $6 million for a little townhouse in the Phoenix area, and that is not good.
No.
Number two, people are like, oh well, I'll hear this. I'm waiting for interest rates to go back down to 2 or 3% or whatever, and I'm like, oh my, that makes my heart and anxiety levels go through the roof, because that means there is like a world like event happening, and no, you don't want it to go back, because that is like the darkest of times. So let's be happy with our 6s and make that work, because if we see a 2 again, it's like it's bad.
No, right now it's healthy. Right? Like that's
yes, we're healthy right now.
Awesome. So if we look at inventory on an annual basis, you can see that 6 months is actually a balanced market. So what this means is if we were to stop taking listings today and have the same buyer demand, we'd run out of inventory and houses to sell in 6 months. So right now on a national average, it's about 3.7 months. And I think you guys would agree that that's pretty close to our Phoenix market as well, right?
Yeah, I was going to say right on 3.7.
Feels like more though. Like the data shows that, but like us right here working on it every day, like we definitely feel like a different side.
And that's because we're looking back at unprecedented times when right after COVID, there was 3,500 houses. I think the low was 3,100 houses on the market for the entire Phoenix metro area. So at the 24,000 mark today, it feels like a lot.
But it's healthy.
It's healthy. Yes.
Yeah.
And the other thing about this that I'd like to point out, and we can move on, is it's a slow climb, but it's climbing, and that is really good for our market.
Yeah, I love it.
All right, let's talk about everyone's favorite things, mortgage rates.
Dum, dum, dum.
So mortgage rates, you can see in that blue line is the annual mortgage rate percent. And then the historical average from 1990 to 2024, which is when most of us remember, is a 6%. So last year they finished on average at 6.72, and the projection for 2025 is 6.5. What are your guys' thoughts?
Well, I think for a lot of us, as we're looking at it, we have such a short window, right, from when we're homeowners, home buyers, what we're seeing. But then when we look at it long term, since the inception of tracking all of this, this is completely normal. And people say, yeah, but houses were so much less than, and so were wages, and so were everything else. So it's commensurate to the market that you're in. So it's healthy. Of course, do we wish that they were lower? Absolutely, because that's impactful on people's payment. But we always go back to, if the payment makes sense, no matter what the cost, does it work for you? So I think my takeaway is, we're average. This is normal. And if we can, I know it's easier said than done, but right now, if we cannot pay attention to what our interest rate is, if our payment makes sense, then it makes sense.
And I think when mortgage rates are so high, it really allows the professionals to stand out. So when you work with Openshaw Real Estate Group, we partner with great lenders, and we have the ability to see some of our clients, depending on the scenarios, get into the 4s, the 5 interest rates. And so there is ways to make housing more affordable. It's just, you have to work with the right people to be able to be better than average, which average is 6 to 6.5%. So.
Well, and to guide you through this too, right? I always, when I have a client that's working with Josh, I say, can you give them the best case scenario on this? What would you advise them to do? Because is it a long-term buy down, or is it looking at a 3-2-1 buy down, or a 2-1 or a 1? Because we don't know what is going to happen tomorrow. There's chatter about things that are going to happen, but what's going to put them in the best position?
Right. My take is, like, Americans kind of have like short-term memory. We only remember things like 4 years at a time, and we're still dipping into the 2s and 3s were normal, and that was severely abnormal. And we don't want them to go back that way. Where we are today, around that 6.5, 6.7, is like right where we need to be. Like, if the pandemic didn't happen, that's where we would naturally be regardless, right? So I think, to Dana's point, people, say they have a max budget, but we're really buying on monthly payment. So yes, if you can afford your payment, I think right now is the best time to buy. There's negotiating room. And we can get into that later, but if it makes sense today, I would buy.
Well, and they say too, right? Like, so if interest rates go down, you're going to refinance. And if they don't, great news is you got the best interest rate you were going to get anyway. So
and if they go down, you don't have to compete.
Yes.
Like, people are waiting, but everybody's waiting. You're not the only one waiting. You're not the only one waiting. Everybody's waiting. So buy when nobody else is.
So the reason we all have short-term memory is because the truth is 74% of the United States population of homeowners have mortgage rates of 5% or less right now. So if we think about that, 5% or less, 74%. The first thing I would like to talk about and get your guys' thoughts on is, if I was dead set and I wanted to keep that rate, because it is fantastic and it's awesome. What are a couple things that those people can do if they need to move, but they just love that interest rate? What are a couple things that they could do to keep it?
Don't take them both. I'll take one, you take one.
No, you take. Go ahead, Sam. I'll let you talk. You go first.
My thing, like me and Heather and even Dana recently, is like building wealth through real estate. So my biggest thing is, like, whenever I go on a listing appointment, I'm always like, are you sure you want to sell this house and not like rent it out? I mean, we all know as professionals that wealth through real estate is one of the best ways to become wealthy. So I try to get my clients to keep the house. Yes, it hurts me because I don't get a commission, right? But ultimately, it doesn't matter for that. It's what's best for the client. So it's always, you can rent it out, keep it, and rent it out.
And then if you need the money, right? Because maybe some people, is it a home equity line of credit? Talk to a lender and find out what it is that you can do to pull the money, to maintain that interest rate and get you into your next home. Because sometimes making a move is out of necessity. It's not a choice. And if there's an opportunity for you to hold on to that place, I've got clients that are traveling nurses and they don't want to sell their home. They want to rent it because they want to come back to it at some point. And maybe they're not even a buyer. They don't need the money for that. But anyways, if we can hold on to a property and rent it, and then take the cash so that you could potentially cash flow and then have your new home.
Use the HELOC to buy the new rate. If you want to know more about HELOCs and stuff, that's like a whole nother podcast, but hit us up. We'll we'll talk to you
Yeah.
about HELOCs for
Mhm.
sure.
And like Dana said, most people aren't moving because of interest rates or inflation. It's really life events. It's
Yeah.
they've had a baby, they're getting a divorce, job changes, relocations, and things like that. And unfortunately, that's not a choice at that time to
Yeah.
move. And so knowing that, I do think that we'll look back in 20 years and think, dang, those people have 3% interest rates. They beat the system.
Yeah.
Almost. So
Well, they live there forever. Like that doesn't happen anymore.
right.
No.
And if they were smart enough to use it to keep it as an investment and keep it, I mean, that's going to be super, super valuable. So we're also going to see that number go down. So when we revisit the slides in 2026, it's not going to be 74% anymore because, again, people have to move.
Well, like
That's
2
how it
years ago, I
works.
think I was like 88% had a 4 and below, and now we're only at like 34%. So there's 4 million transactions every year. That number is going to continue to shrink until, oh my gosh, the 6.5 is the normal, right? And that's what we remember.
Yeah.
Well, and I'd just be curious to know how many people that you've worked with recently that have had an opportunity to hold on to their home and that mortgage rate.
Yep.
I can tell you that while we offer it as an option, right, and we talk through people over this, their main concern is moving, getting their family to where they need to go. So it's not always holding on to that property.
Yep.
It's sacrificing that amazing interest rate that they have
Yeah.
to get where they need to go.
And the good news is that sacrifice of a 6% usually comes with great equity. And so it's just a trade, and you just have to decide if that trade is worth it for you and your family. So now let's talk about affordability, because that's what really matters here. Because if we wanted to buy a $50 million house and the payment was $1,200, I'm in. Are you in?
Right.
Yeah,
You
all day
in?
long.
Right. So we're all really buying on a payment, which is affordability. So something about this graph, right? What this is showing us is the percent of income that goes towards housing. So you can see in 2024, 32% of our income was going towards housing. In 2020, it was 18%. The high was actually 1981, which is 49% of our income was going towards housing. What are your thoughts?
Well, I wasn't born back then, Dana. How was that?
I'm going to ignore that. Well, what I find is interesting is that through again, I go back to the inception of us tracking all of this data. We are higher than both of the averages. But what this graph really gives us is perspective, and to look at history and how do we not repeat that 49%. And so what's interesting, in COVID times, we are 18%. And I think that lines itself up with interest rates. And then we're going to look at, there's been chatter about building back the economy through real estate and what are they going to do with mortgage interest rates. And I think the next few months will be really interesting to see how that plays out, if it does, and what it does to this affordability, because there's still demand out there. And when we look at that inventory, it's still low. So that affordability is going to continue to go up if mortgage rates are higher, as well as prices.
For sure. I mean, I think we're just coming off the pandemic boom, right? I think that's what's shooting it up a lot, but we're also seeing it like start to trend down. I think we have a slide here where we talk about like price drops and stuff. So like in the Phoenix area, the closer you get to the buyer market, the more often the prices kind of tend to come down. I say come down, it's not like a scary thing because people still have like insane amounts of equity in their house. So if you have 30% equity, even if you've only bought your house 5 years ago, you probably still have somewhere 25 to 35, maybe 40% equity in it. You can take like a 5% price correction.
Yes.
Still be netting 30 to 40% and make the move, right? So like people are like, oh man, I had to make a price correction. I'm losing money. No. You're just not making as much money as you thought you could. Right? We're in the market, but you were still making money.
Yeah.
You're still making money.
Something big about this slide that I think will be an issue as we continue to age is people are over-indexing for experiences instead of building wealth.
Sure.
And so when our grandparents and their grandparents were starting out, they would get a house, right? They would work to paying that off. They were not going to Starbucks every day and have the experience of someone making a drink. Tell me where you guys went on vacations. It was drivable, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
we're going to Washington, D.C. for spring break, right?
Yeah.
So I think that us as a population, especially in our generation, are valuing experiences more than wealth. And that's a choice. That's a choice that will probably hurt our generation as we continue to age. And because you can't pay bills and health bills and all of those things on experiences, right?
Mhm.
And so I know that the average age of the home ownership keeps increasing year over year over year, and it's going to be an issue in our country. And so it's just something to think about. That 32% feels high right now, but it's a different 32% than 25 years ago, because we're spending money on extra frivolous stuff, right? And that's where we're
Yeah.
feeling it.
It's the cars. I mean, we could go down the rabbit
Yep.
hole of how things have changed. And you mentioned the first time home buyer, the age has gone up. It's 38.
Yep.
Yeah, which is
38.
insane.
That's you 2 years ago.
Right.
When did you?
That was you. Don't take that either. Yeah.
I'm only 45.
But not to jump on like the bandwagon of not watching the news, but I think the news tells you that how unaffordable houses are, and how it's so tough to buy a house right now.
No.
And it's not. It is tough to buy a house right now when you're drinking Starbucks in your brand new $90,000 car, living at home with mom, trying to figure out why I can't afford a $3,000 payment when my truck is $1,000 and I have an eating habit that's $3,000. Right? Like if we kind of used to be cool and stop going out all the time,
Packed our lunch.
Yeah.
we could probably buy a house, which ultimately is a better investment than the Starbucks. Right.
Well, and I think this is because we all have young children, and this gives us an opportunity, knowing what we know, what we instill in our own children about building wealth through real estate and business and making smart choices so that our children aren't buying their first home at 45, right? And they're doing it at the young ages that we did. I was 24 when Michael and I bought our first home, and you guys were even younger than that, right?
Somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember. That was a long time ago.
It was.
Awesome. Last in this little series is talking about, you already referenced it, price drops. And so what that could kind of look like, and what people who are selling their home or buying homes can kind of expect from price drops. So this graph shows the percentage of listings that have had at least one price drop.
So what I get from this slide is we're tracking data from the last 2 years, month over month. And it seems like January of every year seems to be the lowest percent of price drops. So meaning January is your best month. It just gets, I don't want to say worse. It gets not.
It increases.
It increases for sellers, right? So, I mean, as you go through the year, you're going to be making incremental or an opportunity to make incremental price corrections.
Well, and what's the way to avoid that?
Pricing it right in the first
Yeah.
place.
Yes.
I mean, we have an opportunity, right, to price it right. Not we,
Because
seller's choice, but
let me ask you this, because it's happened to you recently.
Yeah.
If you price a house correctly in this market, in the greater Phoenix area, where it's technically a seller's market, but it feels like a buyer's market, can you get multiple offers?
Yes.
Can you get people to pay over list price?
Yes.
In this market?
Yes.
Can you get them to like waive inspections or benzers or something? In this market?
Yeah.
Even though the news tells us that it's just crazy and it's horrible, we can still get multiple offers at prices up.
Yes, absolutely. Or just really clean offers. If you price it right, if time is important to you.
Right.
I ask my clients, what's more important, time or money? You know, and if it's money and they have all the time, it's their decision. But if it's time because they have to be somewhere, which we talked about, most people are doing it for a reason, then we need to price it right.
Right. 100%.
And avoid price drops.
Yeah. You don't want to do price drops. It's best to price it right up front to drive the traffic. Now, we're not seeing like the 30 offers crazy high like they did in the pandemic, right? But you can only sell it to
one person. Yeah.
So even if you get 2 offers and you let them compete over it, right? Works out.
And maybe it's not even price necessarily, but what's going to be the cleanest offer, what's most ideal for the seller, and what's a win-win for both buyer and seller. But there's an opportunity to sell it for at or above list price with a really clean offer if you price it right from the beginning.
Well, price has to match the condition,
Mhm.
right? Like if it's not an opportune condition, then you're not going to get that high price. So you got to be open to what that looks like.
Yeah.
Staging comes into play with this, I think.
We just want to avoid those price drops.
Right. So that's the numbers that drive U.S. real estate right now.
I love it.